Well, greetings and good evening, IFL Nation, and welcome to tonight's show. We are back in the lab after a 1 week excursion out on the road. We were at Dave & Buster's just outside of Boston, Mass. Last week, where we analyzed the conference semifinals. But fast forwarding to present, it is 10 p.m. over here on the East Coast, which means one thing: it is Wager Wednesday in the Indoor Football League. Thank you so much for tuning in for your weekly rundown of the epic action in the week that was, even more epic action this week that is to come, along with a whole bunch of other discussion of all of the great goings on in this league as we quickly make our way to the IFL Championship in 2 weeks' time. For those of you who are new to the league or to this channel or to the forum in general, I want to welcome you aboard. I will say you picked a heck of a time to hop on in. My name is Alex Schuberth. I am a huge, passionate fan of the Indoor Football League, really indoor football in general. But it's really my passion in the Indoor Football League that has channeled me into my current role as lead IFL contributor for a sports forum site called Sports Coast to Coast, which is a Pacific Northwest-based sports forum site that specializes specifically in the coverage of the Indoor Football League and its 14 active member teams specifically. Each week, our team puts together up-to-date team rosters, game previews, game recaps, and a whole bunch of other analysis out there for every team for every moment in this league. If you call yourself a fan of the IFL, Sports Coast to Coast must be your number one destination to get your daily or weekly download, whatever it is, of all of your great IFL content. Of note is that today marks the 12th anniversary of Sports to Coast being an active forum. So happy times all around. Figured I would mention that because, to be honest, I had overlooked it before I saw the profile on X. And hey, it's Sports Coast Coast's birthday today. So that's definitely something worth celebrating. And I guess this show is a fitting way to contribute to that. So here we are. We've got 3 games left: the Western Conference Final, the Eastern Conference Final, and the IFL National Championship game in Tucson. That is it for action in the 2025 season. But all we can do is relish and enjoy every second of great IFL action that we have left. Alrighty, so tonight we are going to be going over an insane week, to put it simply, of IFL football. We had on-field action that contained just about positively everything that you could imagine. We had games go right down to the last millisecond. We had a blowout sprinkled in there. We had a number 4 versus number 1 upset in the Western Conference for the 3rd consecutive year. So we are going to take some time, go over those 4 games in great detail, see how they went, how our bet shook out, and we will move on to looking at our team-by-team trends again to see how closely this past week's results have followed to what the 8 qualifying playoff teams served up during the regular season. So we'll go over all of that, and once we have our reflection piece all said and done, we're going to get right down to brass tacks and talk about the conference championship matchups, what you need to know leading up to each game. We've got one on Friday, which is the Western Final, and one on Saturday, which is the Eastern Conference Final. And those 2 games decide who moves on to Tucson. So the last thing that we'll do tonight, I think it's a fun little exercise to do. Think about what lines would be for all 4 possible IFL championship matchups. The way I see it, we see the NFL do this all the time with Super Bowl matchups, planning those out in advance on the sports books out there. So why not run this exercise here in the IFL? We've got decent enough data size to pull it off, so I think it's worth discussing. So we will make that a nice, fun little thing to do to wrap up tonight's festivities. Alrighty, so our first round of the playoffs, single elimination, do or die, kicked off Saturday afternoon with the 4-versus-1 matchup in the Eastern Conference. The Jacksonville Sharks traveling from the Sunshine State over to Moline to take on the Quad City Steamwheelers, the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, hosting a playoff game for the first time since 2007. To put that vast distance of time in perspective, yours truly was not even in his teenage years. That is the staggering amount of time that we're talking about here. And you know what? Perhaps because of that, Quad City capitalized on every opportunity that they had to set themselves apart in this game, especially early on. When the offense staged touchdowns on all 4 of its drives, Daquan Neal and Jordan Vesey just dominating the show. While Jacksonville kind of struggled a little bit. They had an early drive that took up like 7-8 minutes of game clock where they got stopped on a 4th and goal. They were also forced into a 3-and-out around the second quarter, deep in their own territory to force a field goal attempt. So with those couple of defining drives, Jacksonville trailed by as many as 18, but they trimmed that down to a 15-point deficit by halftime. From that point, we saw Jacksonville do precisely what they did last week, erase that 18-point hole. They got touchdowns on each of their first 3 drives of the second half. They got a big interception in the end zone off Daquan Neal. That was by John Huggins. And the only thing that went wrong for Jacksonville really in that rally was that the extra point, which would have given them the lead about midway through the 4th quarter, was blocked. But at that point, it's a 41-all game. Momentum still with Jacksonville. Quad City had to respond in some way, shape, or form, and they got just that with a touchdown run by Daquan Neal, the 6th touchdown of the game that he had accounted for at that point. So that set Quad City out ahead again. And then with a few minutes left in the quarter, 4th down run by Tyler Huff gets stopped a couple yards short of the line to gain. And from there, Quad City, with a minute left, delivered the dagger. Touchdown pass, 20 yards to a wide open Jared Ware Jr. And that was pretty much all she wrote. Jacksonville couldn't get a touchdown on that ensuing drive either. At which point they could have maybe gone for 2 and an onside kick, but still would have taken a lot for them to get back into the game. But in the end, the team that needed to make the plays here was Quad City. They advance to the next round, 57-41, the win against the Sharks, who were making the IFL playoff debut this past weekend. Their first foray into IFL postseason action is cut to a 1-game sample, while the Steamwheelers set themselves up for a home playoff game coming up on Saturday. The team that they'll host was going to be one of Tulsa or Green Bay. This was the battle of Sunday afternoon out in Wisconsin at the Resch Center, where there have just been positive vibes all season long. And this game was no different. Right off the jump, Green Bay set the tone defensively. They got a fumble in the red zone recovered, turned that into a touchdown, intercepted Castronova in the end zone, translated that into a touchdown. So right off the bat, they're up 2 scores, pretty much borne by a defensive unit that had its question marks in terms of points given up per game leading up to this do-or-die playoff contest. But they did reasonably well to start. It was good enough to build up a 10-point halftime lead. And then the Blizzard kicked it into hyperdrive, like we've seen so many times from this team, especially at home, where in all three phases, they were just on a whole other level. Max Myler in the offense continued to chug. The defense ended up getting 3 more interceptions off of Castronova, who, by the way, was 15-0 as a starter across multiple leagues in the 2025 calendar year coming into this game. So, worst time that you can come up with in terms of putting up maybe your worst game as a pro, considering the situation. But in any event, it turns out to be one of the bigger blowouts in IFL playoff history. I believe when I did my research, it is the 17th all-time to have a 30-plus point margin of victory. That's precisely what the Blizzard accumulated in their 58-26 domination of the Oilers. So the Eastern Conference is all chalk. It'll be Green Bay at Quad City. Excellent matchup, great historic rivalry, and the 4th time that we get to see these teams do battle in the 2025 year. The only bad thing that you could say about that game from maybe our betting perspective, our overbet lost by 5 points. Turns out when a team turns the ball over 5 times in the same game, overs are difficult to cash. Who knew? So that was how the landscape shook out in the Eastern Conference. Our path to forging the Western Conference final began shortly after the completion of the Green Bay game with the Vegas Nighthawks and the Bay Area Panthers. This was the number 4 versus number 1 matchup in the West, a matchup which, as we've stated before, had been won by the number 4 seed in this conference in each of the past 2 years. So Vegas was trying to make it number 3 in a row in that department, whereas the Panthers were trying to get quick redemption from their playoff loss last year, which was in the first round off a 13-3 season. Exactly how the situation into this game played out. And like we saw with the couple games before, the team that got off to the quicker start wound up being the one to set themselves up in the best possible position for success. In this case, the Nighthawks held the Panthers back on their first drive of the game, forced a long field goal attempt. On their second drive, got an interception off Josh Jones and forced another lengthy field goal on the next drive, the third drive for the Panthers. And each of those resulting drives coming back for Vegas all resulted in touchdowns. So before anybody had any chance to figure out what was going on, we had a 20-0 Vegas Nighthawk lead to completely stun and silence the crowd of the SAP Center. But, as is tradition, these Rob Keefe teams battle back with might, which is exactly what they did. In the second quarter, they got 24 points in the frame, and they cut the deficit down to 5 points at the midway point. The third quarter, pretty methodical. Vegas got a touchdown to start. Bay Area responded with a pretty big touchdown of their own. The fourth quarter saw so much sloppiness from 2 playoff teams that I really couldn't wrap my head around it. The teams just basically locked each other down defensively. Vegas had an empty drive, and then Bay Area, they got close, but they wound up turning the ball over on downs on a pretty controversial non-call, according to some fan discussion. But, that drive was at the minute left. The Panthers are still down by 5. They did have all 3 timeouts, which they had to use all 3 of them up, but they did get a field goal attempt out there from Ben Derby that missed, which gave the Panthers one last chance down 5 to try to get that game-winning touchdown. And on the first play of that drive, it was a quick throw to the outside. I think it was either Tyrese Chambers or Tosinoi Economy. I can't remember off the top of my head who exactly it was. But he received it, not too far away from the boards, but ended up cutting inside, got tackled in the field of play. So the clock continued to run. It bled like 15, 20 seconds off the clock in a scenario where Bay Area only had like 35 seconds to start out with. In the end, it all came down to one last desperation heave at the end zone. Jones was able to get it off, but that prayer of a Hail Mary found the hands of multiple Vegas Nighthawk defenders. The ball came crashing down to the turf, and that is how the game ended. An upset, our first of the postseason, as Vegas gets their first ever IFL playoff win, advancing to the Western Conference Final by a final score of 36-31. At that point, they awaited the winner of the other semifinal, which took place on Monday night between the San Diego Strike Force and the Arizona Rattlers. And I'll tell you, this game could have its entirely own video segment. But I will do the best I can to kind of keep things tight and condensed for us here, because we do have our regularly scheduled programming to take part in. But unlike the other 3 games that we just went over, this one, at least on the turf, was played pretty much dead even. We were tied after the first quarter. We were tied at halftime. The only separation by the end of the third quarter was a missed extra point from Arizona, which resulted in a 1-point San Diego lead. But then the fourth quarter came, and all heck broke loose. Both defenses made some pretty solid stands to begin the quarter, with Arizona getting theirs first before San Diego responded with their own. The Strike Force getting a touchdown from Eddie Vander in that following sequence to put themselves ahead by 8 points. So right at that point, Arizona needed some of their late game magic that they've been pretty darn good at pulling off throughout this season. They did get a really nice play on a touchdown with just about a couple minutes to go. They failed the 2-point conversion, kept it a 2-point game. And then they do recover the onside kick and translate that into a touchdown pass and a 2-point conversion with about 37 seconds to go. So at this point, Arizona's up by 6 points. Suddenly, all they need is a defensive stop, and it'll be the defending champs to go through into the next round. The following drive is what sparked the biggest controversy. San Diego, out of timeouts by this point, had run a play that only got to the 1-yard line and was kept in bounds and sent the Strike Force scrambling to try to put together one last play before 000s hit. The snap barely got off. Despite all the chaos, the officials let it play on. Nate Davis finds Arthur Jackson III for a touchdown. The play's reviewed for a good solid 10 to 12 minute period of time. There were just so many questions to answer on that one play alone. Was everybody that was set supposed to be set for the specified amount of time? And after everything, officials ultimately upheld the ruling on the field that the play was legal, and San Diego scored the game-tying touchdown. The only thing left to do at that point, send Ernesto Lacayo out, see if he can win the game with a usual extra point, and he effortlessly put it through. So in about as heartbreaking of a script as you can get for Rattlers fans, the dream of a title defense comes to an end in the first round as the Strike Force get the win 49-48, making it a second consecutive trip to the Eastern Conference Final for Taylor Geneser and his crew. So that was the on-field product of what happened throughout the past weekend. Our bets went 3-1, and we did get a little bit of a nice break in the San Diego-Arizona game, because when Arizona got their go-ahead score, we basically needed a touchdown and not a field goal in order to have that hit. And Arizona very easily could have played that out to run out the clock with a running play on 3rd and 8 and set up their new kicker, Nick Belcher, for the game winner. But they ended up going for the jugular. They got the touchdown, and then everything else that happened after that. And I will I will leave it at that. But it's another winning week for us. We are well on our way to another winning postseason as far as our predictions go. On the full season overall, 65 wins, 51 losses. This is pretty spectacular of a result set here, particularly with our hot streak in picking overs, as well as underdogs, having covered in 7 of our 10 picks against the team that didn't draw that favorite designation. So here is one last look at our parlay tracker for the 2025 season. You know, we had those 3 big wins, week 1, week 3, and week 6. And then from week 7 onward, we just couldn't buy one. Though it was not by lack of consistent picks. In fact, we had hit 60% of these legs on an individual basis. 36 out of 60 in total on the season. Which if you do the math, if you take that 60%, multiply it by 3 times to get your expected probability of winning one parlay, extend that out over 20 weeks, I would have expected to win 4 parlays this year, roughly. So getting just 3, especially in the way that we did, extremely unlucky. But, you know, we do prove something here. Parlays, and, you know, the good betting minds out there will tell you parlays, as alluring as they are sucker bets at the end of the day. So they got the enhanced payout, but they've also got that risk. If one goes wrong, it spoils the whole thing. And we saw that all but one situation happen. It might even be 10, maybe even 11 times throughout this season. So rearrange these in basically any other order between correct picks and incorrect picks. You're more than likely going to get to at least 4 3-win sequences. But that's the story of our parlays for this season. We'll have to hope to continue our consistency heading into 2026 and just hold out hope that regression to the mean finally does kick in. Kind of wanted it this year after we had said last year we wanted it, but looks like we'll have to keep on waiting. So here's our weekly results to date. Our 3-1 week last week puts us right on the cusp of our preseason goal on the flat method of being up by 6 units by the time the entire thing is all said and done. To be honest, if we can win 2 of our final 3 bets, I feel comfortable in saying we are there, which would be incredible if we were able to do that. But from week 17 onward, we have just been on absolute fire here, correctly picking 13 out of 18 games overall, seeing our net profit soar up by basically 7 units. And you know what? We want to keep that rise going up until the very end of the season. So that's our goal. Keep our minds sharp. We've done a lot really, really well so far in terms of prognosticating some things. But each week we are 0-0. And that's kind of how the mindset has to be going into these. And here's that same graph, but by percentage. You'll see that both methods are above that 0% line for the first time since week 2. So we have finally bridged that extended gap that all of those fruitless money line favorite bets that were heavier on the weighted method than they were on the flat method. We're finally starting to see that bridge get gapped. So again, the idea here, keep things on that upswing. We've got 3 games to go. 2 games, 2 wins out of those 3, at least. Hopefully 3 wins out of 3. Will set us up in a great space when we do our reflection piece after all of this is after all the games have been played. So quick look at our team-by-team trends here. I've pared this down to just the 8 teams that participated last week. Having the 6th hour eliminated, it's pretty much moot point at this juncture. But what we can see here is that there are a lot of these trends from the regular season that did carry over, at least for this 1 week sample of the playoffs. For instance, Quad City, very strong team in terms of covering the spread, did precisely that against the Jacksonville Sharks by virtue of just outright winning, because that game was a pick'em. That game also going over between the Jacksonville Sharks, as both teams were over 500 in that bet department this season. So pretty much continuing on with that relatively significant trend. Over on the western side of things, we had Arizona with a 5-11 spread mark. We saw them barely not cover by about, fraction of a second, or however the margin is that you want to put that. They ended up dropping the game. Very unfortunate fashion for those fans who were heck bent on a repeat. But in another significant trend there, Bay Area, the best under-cashing team of the 8 in the playoff field, played another under game to reward those who went back to that well last week as well. So goes to show you there's power in some of these trends, and they're always worth looking into regardless of the situations at hand. They just give you that much more of a data point to lean upon when guiding your picks. Updating our lifetime results here with our 3-1 playoff record so far. We're doing pretty solid here. I know my name is kind of blocking it off there, but we are at 193 total single game bet wins since the series began in 2023. That's compared with 160 losses and 2 bets last year, which ended up resulting in a push. We didn't have any pushes this year, but then again, there weren't a whole lot of even numbered point spreads to look at this year. I don't even think there was any whole number over-unders for that matter. But in any event, this is on track to be a super successful year. But yeah, we're not done yet. We've got 3 games to go, 2 this week, 1 later on in the month. It's all about improving what we currently have. And that is my motto. All right, time for our weekly disclaimers. The lines and odds that we're going to be using today are going to come from DraftKings Sportsbook. This series is something I put together purely for fun and for entertainment. It's not meant to be betting advice per se. It's not meant to be a tool used for money making, because as we've seen, not just in the IFL, but in sports in general, there's no such thing as a lock. Wild things can and will happen where it's just common sense to be safe with the amount of money that you put down on these games. On that note, if you would like to tail or fade my selections, you're more than welcome to do so, but please gamble responsibly. I highly recommend practicing safe gaming habits, which includes setting a budget in terms of both time and money. Risk only what you can afford to lose. And if you feel like you or someone that you love is teetering along problem gaming territory, please know that there are online resources that you can consult for seeking help in that area. There's a lot of resources online, like haveagameplan.org. Responsibleplay.org is another great example as well, along with several state-issued sources of help as well that you can lean upon to kind of get back on the straight and narrow, if you will, when it comes to that. Those sites and those resources are just great things to look to in terms of debunking gambling myths, for Q&A, whatever that you need in order to get what you need to out of that. With all that being said, our 4-team bracket now is set in stone, let's dive in to the previews and the picks for Conference Championship Weekend 2025. And here we will begin with Friday's Western Conference Final. This is a 10:05 p.m. game on the East Coast. Vegas and San Diego. Odds makers have Vegas as 3.5-point favorites here. The over-under is 84.5. On the money line, Vegas is minus 162. San Diego plus 136. And this is an important note here. If you are newer to the league or maybe unfamiliar with all of the off-turf action that has gone on since Monday's game concluded, this game is taking place in Henderson, Nevada, in the home of the Vegas Nighthawks. It turns out that there were complications in terms of procuring Front Wave Arena, which is the usual home of the San Diego Strike Force, to get this playoff game in this weekend. So the league and presumably the teams agreed to this arrangement to have this game played here. So despite being the number 4 seed, which in theory should not get you a home game in the playoffs, Vegas kind of draws an ace in the hole, a joker's wild, if you will. And they're able to play this conference championship game, their biggest game in franchise history, in front of their home fans. Though administratively, they are still the road team for kind of paper filling out purposes. But this was such a great series throughout the 2025 regular season. Notably, these two teams actually have not met since week 10. It was a very front-loaded series for these teams, marked by victories by the road team in each of the first two. Vegas's first win against San Diego was that 20-point rally at Front Wave Arena to begin both teams' seasons. San Diego came back a couple weeks later, took down Vegas 35-27 in this arena back in week 4 or 5. And then week 10, back at Front Wave, the Nighthawks were one defensive stand away from making it 3 wins for the visiting team in the series. But Rudy Johnson, who's going to be inactive for this game, by the way, barreling in for a 1-yard touchdown that may or may not have crossed the goal line for those of you who remember. But it was ruled on the field as a touchdown, and San Diego got the win. So on the series overall, San Diego leads 2-1. To pull up some stats here for you, Vegas, probably the most underrated team in the league this year by virtue of just some of the numbers that they've put up on the full season. 47.9 points scored per game. That's second in the league. Defensively, 38.9 points allowed. That's also second best in the league. Meanwhile, for San Diego, their stats may be a little bit more muted in comparison. 42.5 per game on offense, which is 9th in the league, and 40.4 points per game on defense, which is 6th in the IFL. So, judging strictly from the numbers, Vegas at minus 3.5 does make a little bit of sense. But here's where the whole situation kind of comes into play, in my opinion. Remember that San Diego just played about the most exhilarating and perhaps emotionally draining game that you could possibly muster up on Monday night. Now you're asking them to prepare for their biggest game of the season so far on just 3 full days of rest, plus travel out to Henderson for a game on Friday. That's basically a 3/4 day turnaround, depending on the way that you look at it. The only other team to have had this situation play out before in the regular season was the Jacksonville Sharks, who had played a game on Saturday, I believe, in Fishers, and then turned it around basically 4 days later to play the Massachusetts Pirates in Lowell on Thursday. And that was a game where the Pirates won by, I'm pretty sure it was 13 points, something like that. So with this being, if for all intents and purposes, a road game for the Strike Force, which is how I'm treating this, these odds are just so stacked against San Diego. But with all that being said, the players are going to come out and they're going to be ready. They understand the situation kind of sucks. It's not ideal. But when Friday at 10 p.m. comes rolling around, these guys are going to be ready. And the same applies for the Vegas Nighthawks as well. Like, this is basically their IFL National Championship for their intents and purposes, with this being their third year in the league. Actually, fourth year in the league, my bad. With an opportunity to make the IFL Championship, perhaps a year too late, if we're being real honest. But as a fan of the game, we can be as mad or disappointed or whatever emotion that you want to choose. You could be as much of that as you want when it comes to kind of showing a little bit of empathy with the Strike Force. Like, they should be hosting this game. We all wish that there was some sort of power in the spirit of fairness to put this game in San Diego, or at the very least a neutral site. But that's not what we get here. So where my mind funnels to at that point is identifying that this is a prime opportunity to back the Vegas Nighthawks, who's going to have, unexpectedly, the home crowd behind them, returning to a place where they have won so often this season, where they're just on a roll right now since that early part of the season when they were 4-4, just trying to figure stuff out. So with everything kind of melding together as far as the situation goes, I'm going to take Vegas on the money line at -162. This is just a team that's playing unbelievably great football right now. Even in that fourth quarter where offensively they kind of came to a halt, you can kind of forgive that a little bit. They were playing against Bay Area, the number one defense in the IFL. But perhaps even more impressively, Vegas showed their ability to win that game as a full team by, in turn, keeping Bay Area off the scoreboard for the entirety of the last 15 minutes of the game as well. So it just has that feel where one thing might not be clicking for Vegas, a big play will be made on the other side of the ball. And we saw that in volume in the game against Bay Area. And it's fair to question exactly how much gas is San Diego going to have left in the tank. It might be a situation where they come out hot for the first 15, first 30. But what is the second quarter going to look like in terms of conditioning? Especially in a scenario where you're basically getting half of the amount of rest in terms of time that you would be typically accustomed to have, especially for a playoff game. So I just see this one as, Jaden DeLaura, Antonio Wimbush, Quentin Randolph getting theirs. We've also yet to see Nate Davis really in any sort of championship game in any capacity since he was with the Duke City Gladiators in the CIF. So it's going to be very interesting. But my pick here is Vegas at -162. And that brings us to the Eastern Conference Final. The Green Bay Blizzard heading back to Quad City, where they were just at less than a month ago on July 12th. Perhaps surprisingly here, it is again the team that's labeled as the road team that is the favorite. Green Bay drawing that designation by a point in the hook. The over-under is 93.5. On the money line, Green Bay's -130. And Quad City is plus a dime. Man, can you come up with a better Eastern Conference final than this? A historic rivalry that has spanned the better part of 2 decades across multiple leagues. And now you put the two together where the winner goes to the IFL Championship and the loser goes home. Cinema is about to be staged in Moline on Saturday night. Two fantastic quarterbacks, Max Myler for Green Bay, Daquan Neal for Quad City. Offensive attacks that have shown incredible ceilings across multiple games this season, and defenses that have held their own at various points throughout the season. Perhaps none more so for Green Bay than last week's win against Tulsa, limiting Sam Castranova's bunch to 26 points, 6 of which were scored by Kyle Robinson at the end of the game, if we're being completely honest. But this is going to be another spectacular game here. Pulling up some stats for you here. Green Bay, we've talked about their explosive offense. Best in the league at 52.6 per game throughout the regular season, while their defense, 45.6 per game, ranked 12th in points allowed in the circuit. For Quad City, their 45.3 points per game sets them in the top 5 in the league, and 41.2 points per game puts them right around the middle at 7th of the 14 teams in the league this season. So again, it's one of those ones where if you look at just those couple metrics alone, Green Bay minus 1.5, you can make the case that it does add up. I will say, for a series that has been as dominated by the home team, at least at the IFL level, as this series has been, where in 15 prior meetings, the home team has won 11, plus 110 is screaming value if you're going to be backing the Quad City Steamwheelers. But it's important to note, there is a lot of history that is kind of inadvertently going against the Steamwheelers for this game. This is the 4th season of the conference-based 4-a-side, 4 versus 1, 2 versus 3 playoff format. In the Eastern Conference, that Eastern Conference final in 2022, 23, and 24 all have been won by the road team. So that is the trend that Quad City is going to have to shake here against a incredibly dangerous Green Bay side. So I'm so tempted to go plus 110 here. I do see that as the more valuable money line option. But I'm actually going to take a bet here along the point total. And it's going to be the over at 93.5. I'm not totally enamored with this play. But one thing I will say that kind of brings my confidence back up a little bit with it is this. It's listen. You've got a team that has averaged over 50 points per game throughout the season. You're not going to be betting on their unders really in any capacity, unless the number skyrocketed to something bafflingly more ridiculous than this one. Look back to their last meeting, week 17. That was a 58-52 game. That's 110 points right there. In looking at Green Bay's road games this season, it was pretty much evenly split between crazy shootouts and, more like 46-30 type of ball games. So if we can get one of those huge boom games rather than a relative bust game, when speaking of it like that, this bet has a reasonably solid shot of holding up. This also taps back into the Quad City over well, which has gone 11-6, including last week's win over Jacksonville. And then the other thing to consider, which is kind of the kicker in all of this, literally and figuratively, is the fact that this is a very friendly deuce environment. And we also happen to have 2 exceptional kickers in Andrew Mevis and Kyle Kaplan. Either one really is capable of putting home like 3 or 4 deuces in this game. So if we happen to get some, to kind of offset maybe any lack of tempo that we're looking for here. That certainly would help. This is a high number, but it's right around where I would have expected it to be. So it makes me a little less nervous rolling the dice here in making this my play. So we're going to go with points out along the Mississippi River and see if our suspicion holds up here. So give me Green Bay and Quad City, the over at 93.5, which is our second highest over that we have played this season. 94.5 on a couple other occasions earlier in the regular season. All right, so now is the time where I guess we talk about, or maybe even debate, who the favored teams to win the IFL Championship would be in order. And as crazy as this sounds, I'm led to believe that if there was a futures market here, the top team along that list may very well be the Vegas Nighthawks. For a couple different reasons. The first off is that they are the more favored team between them and Green Bay to make it out of their respective conference finals. So that inherently in and of itself makes the chances for Vegas that much higher. The other thing to consider is once they do get to the IFL Championship game, you're getting to the ultimate contest of the league, which in its current form has not yet been won by an Eastern Conference team. It's been all Western Conference winners up to this point. Obviously, that's something that Green Bay / Quad City will be hoping to smash that trend. Whoever makes it out of that conference. But it is definitely something noteworthy, especially where we don't really get much of a move in terms of geography for the championship game moving from Vegas over to Tucson. It's still firmly entrenched in that basically central location of the Western Conference, if you will. So I'd have Vegas as my number one likely team here. Number two, the Green Bay Blizzard. Pretty much the same exact reasoning for them as with Vegas. They're the more favored team, according to the lines here, to win the Eastern Conference final. And then if we do the inverse order from there to figure out the rest of our land, Quad City would be the third longest odds or second longest odds. Green Bay would be the second shortest and Vegas the shortest. But the longest odds at this point would have to go to the San Diego Strike Force. That's not to say that it's complete impossibility that the Strike Force could advance and win the whole thing. Especially if they do make it out of the Western Conference final. Suddenly they would be in that position where, hey, the Western Conference has won 3 straight IFL national championships. So would they then be able to make it a fourth against a Green Bay or a Quad City team, both of whom they would stack up reasonably well with? And I'll be honest, I wish I could see what these odds look like. If I were to guess them for futures, I'd say Vegas plus 200, Green Bay plus 240, Quad City plus 250, and San Diego plus 400. If I were to just strictly speculate. But obviously, those aren't official odds. That's just a hunch from a guy who likes to do insane amounts of math. So there's our nice little discussion there as well. I also put up some hypothetical lines for the championship game up on X. You can follow me at Shuby the Sharp and trickle down over to that post if you're curious about specifics on spreads and over-unders of those matchups. But yeah, that's it. That's our Western Conference final. That's our Eastern Conference final, and a bit of a precursor heading into the IFL National Championship game. So with that, that's going to wrap things up for the evening. I want to thank you so much again for tuning in, taking some time. I really do appreciate it. For those of you who are going to be placing some bets this week, I wish you the best of luck, and I will see you at the cashier. Have a great weekend, and see you.